Lawrence Burney is a writer, editor, and critic, and the founder of True Laurels, an independent magazine covering Baltimore's music and cultural scene. His work has appeared in publications such as New York Magazine, GQ, Washington Post, and Pitchfork. He has also worked as an editor at The Fader, a staff writer at Vice, and an editor-reporter for the Baltimore Banner. His first book, No Sense in Wishing, a collection of essays, is out right now. Hopefully you picked it up downstairs. Creative Mornings Baltimore, please help me welcome Lawrence to the stage.
Morning. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Good morning, y'all. Thank you for coming. I feel like I'm on Showtime at the Apollo right now. But thank y'all for coming. My name is Lawrence Burney, born and raised in Baltimore City. Give it up for Baltimore. This is my first time at Creative Mornings. Thankful to Kira, Mario, the whole Creative Mornings team, the volunteers, the BMA. Thank you so much for having me. I would have not came out this early for myself, so thank y'all for coming. 2 months ago, let me get this clicker right. 2 months ago, I came out with a book called No Sense in Wishing. I took this photo off of Pinterest. That's not my hand, but shout out to this person. Look like they might be in like New York or something like that, so thank you to them. The book is a collection of essays. Every essay essentially is a particular moment in my life where I came in contact with some sort of cultural production, whether it be a film, an album, an artist, something in my neighborhood, something that led me to a transformative experience. Those things that you come in contact with throughout your life that they change you. And I think everybody can kind of relate to that experience. You might not relate to the specific artist that I pinpoint in the book, but I think everybody can relate to, during your adolescence or your early adulthood when you absorb something that kind of just shifts your worldview. So the book is that, and I think it aligns perfectly with the theme of this month, which is Blossom. I'm going to take 3 moments from my book that kind of facilitated my blossoming as a person, as a creative, and just as a thinker, honestly. So I'm going to start with, this is me at about 15 years old, as you can see from the long-ass t-shirt. That was 2005 or so. And for people who are, grew up in hip-hop culture, I think everybody can kind of remember where hip-hop was in the early stages of the 2000s. It was very like aggressive, rugged, hyper-masculine. I would argue the majority of the biggest artists that we had at that time, around 2004, 2005, I think of like a T.I. or a Young Jeezy, or, Jay-Z was kind of old at that time, but Jay-Z, Gucci Mane wasn't out yet, Lil Wayne. You get the point. It was a particular type of artist who was a mainstream artist. And at this time in my life, I was just really trying my hardest to fit in. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be tough. I wanted to appear as like, a rebel, essentially. And I think that type of music was the representation of that sort of way of being. And when I was about 15 or 16, I went to a graduation party that my cousin Ryan had. He graduated from Mervo, and he was different, Like I was kind of like following the crowd, doing what everybody else did, but Ryan him and his crew of friends, they had like mohawks, and they wore jeans that fit. If you remember the 2000s, people weren't wearing jeans that fit. That just wasn't the thing. I was wearing size 40 jeans, and I probably weighed 135 at the time. So that was the style. So I went to this graduation party, and it was him and his friends, and they had like slip-on checkered Vans, and they were listening to like Little Brother, if people are familiar with that group, and more of the alternative side of rap. And I remember this particular moment at the party when this song came on, and I wasn't familiar with the song, but it was like a skateboarding song, essentially. And it was by an artist named Lupe Fiasco. Shout out to Lupe. I think he actually lives here now. He's teaching at Peabody in the hip hop program. But there's an artist named Lupe Fiasco, and his breakout single was a song called Kick Push. And that song was, I think it was about a lot of things, but on the surface it was about a kid who was skateboarding and kind of like trying to fit in. And it was not the typical rap music at the time. And I looked around at this party, and I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of sitting in the corner, and Ryan and his friends are like having the time of their lives. They're like rejoicing, they're rapping a song to each other, and like I said, they're dressed very differently than I'm dressed. So I'm kind of like in the corner looking at them like, this is super corny. Like I would never listen to music like this. But one thing that I remember from that time was I was honestly jealous of them, because I think that they exhibited a freedom that I didn't have. You know, I think I was very focused on just fitting in and being the same as everybody, and they didn't seem to have that sort of hang up. So in my mind, I'm like, this is whack, but I'm also like, I like the fact that they aren't dealing with the same thing that I'm dealing with. They don't have this thing inside of them that tells them they have to assimilate. So I think later on in that summer, when I was at home listening to using LimeWire and BearShare, FrostWire, I'm sure, you know, if you're an older millennial, you remember that. But I stumbled across some of Lupe Fiasco's music, and I started listening to it, and I was like, oh, wow, he's not just a kick push guy. I think kick push was kind of like the mainstream push to get him out in front of people. But when I started listening to his music, specifically his mixtapes, he actually was a really astute storyteller about the Black American condition, specifically in the urban setting. And, you know, his music talked about the ills of the community. It talked about, you know, young people growing up and wanting to be something that they didn't necessarily see in their community. And then, you know, after a series of disappointments or, you know, obstacles that they might have not been able to clear, they kind of were swallowed by their environment. He challenged power structures. He challenged politicians. But he was also cool, you know. I think he was probably like in his early 20s at the time, and he was like wearing like a lot of like Japanese streetwear, all of that kind of thing. And I think his music was conscious, but it was youth culture driven. And I think that combination really did something to me, because I think conscious rap was prevalent at the time, sort of. You had people like Common, or even Kanye in those days was considered a conscious rapper, but they felt older. They didn't feel accessible. My mother listened to those people, so I was like, I'm not listening to that type of rap. But Lupe Fiasco was like the perfect mixture of those things. And by the end of that summer, I ended up being a massive fan. But I think the most important part of that is Lupe's music kind of gave me the permission to exhibit masculinity in a different way, or maybe just kind of show me the way that my actual experience was. I couldn't relate to what Young Jeezy or any of those people was doing. I didn't sell kilos of cocaine. I didn't, you know, that wasn't my life, but it was cool to me. But I think when Lupe came out, it was like, oh, okay, this is actually aligns more with how I see the world. This is somebody that lives in the same working class neighborhood as these other rappers, but his vantage point is just different. He's not a participant necessarily in the things he's observing, but he can give you the hows and the whys and the becauses and all of that. So, you know, I think his artistry is probably the first thing that I encountered that gave me the opportunity to kind of shift my focus. So I'm going to share a song of his. It's called Glory. It's from, I was supposed to go to the next slide, actually. I forgot. But yeah, this is Lupe. At that time, as you can see, he had a mixtape called Revenge of the Nerds, which is why I didn't like it. At least from the outset. He's there with like a skateboard. You get the point, you know? In hindsight, it doesn't look that different, but if you place yourself in 2005, it was extremely different. So there's a song on this mixtape, Fahrenheit 115, Revenge of the Nerds, called Glory. And I think Glory is the perfect representation of Lupe's power. in the song, he talks about the conditions of his neighborhood, but it's kind of like a motivational message to people to kind of, if you're in that type of environment, how to persist and stay focused. And even though you're kind of traversing this environment that's essentially like a minefield, if you stick to it and you stay focused and you have grace towards your community, you can come out in one piece. So I'm gonna play a little bit of that and then share some other things. And like I said, I think encountering this music contributed to the blossoming, which is the theme for today. And this, I have a essay in my book titled "Glory" that is about my encountering with Lupe's music. So I'm going to go through 2 more instances in my life where I feel like me coming in contact with these artists had a permanent effect on me. Okay, this is this is me and my mother. But the nice thing about this photo is from this night. So this is a flyer from 1998. I think December. It's somewhere in there. Yeah, December 6, 1998. I was 8 years old. And this actually took place inside of the lobby area where the Parkway Theater is now. And I don't think it was functioning as a movie theater at the time. But my grandfather is a musician. He toured with Parliament Funkadelic a couple times, like in the early 90s. And my mother and him and some of their friends, when we were living on Asquith Street, which is not far from here, they had a jazz band called Wolfpack. And we all lived in the same house. And in the evenings after they were off work, they would rehearse in our basement until my grandmother told them it was time to stop. And one of their members had left the band, and they were kind of like trying to figure out their next steps. And my grandfather got a call from a guy named Art Woodard, who was he booked jazz shows in the region between Baltimore and DC. And he presented him with this opportunity, like, I need somebody to open up for Gil Scott Heron. Gil Scott Heron was coming to be the headliner act for a benefit for, you see it, the Heritage Shadows of the Silver Screen Museum and Cinema. It was, I forget who the guy was who owned it, but they were trying to turn the Parkway into a black-run theater. I guess maybe the only black-run performance space / theater along the East Coast, and this was kind of a benefit to fundraise for that initiative. And so they got booked to open for the show. My mother didn't have anywhere else to take me, so I was dragged along to this gig with old people and jazz playing. And I remember sitting there with her, and I had no idea who Gil Scott Heron was, but I saw the gravitational pull that he had on the crowd. And, that time just passed. And as I got into my early adulthood, I went to, and this is the time where I was trying to be like different, the beginning of college, I was trying to listen to older music and seem more well-rounded than I actually was. And I went to Soundgarden one day, and I was digging through records. And, in record digging, sometimes you kind of just gravitate towards what catches your eye. Is not necessarily about the music. And this is the album that I saw, Winter in America. I don't know if anybody here is familiar, but Winter in America is I believe the first album that Gil Scott Heron collaborated with Brian Jackson. Brian Jackson is one of his main collaborators throughout his career. And for those that don't know, Gil Scott Heron lived in Baltimore for a time. He was a MFA writing student at Johns Hopkins. And the makings of this Winter America started here. It was recorded in Silver Spring, and he was living in DC at the time that it came out. But I picked up this album, and I remember the name like, oh, I think my mother opened up for this guy when I was young. And I think sometimes when you have those experiences as a younger person, once you get back into your adulthood, it's like, oh, this might be kind of out of my realm, but I've already engaged with it. So it kind of pushed me to kind of engage with it again. And I want to give a short little story about this album cover. This image, it's painted over, but this image was originally taken on Green Mountain 33rd in the early 70s. A guy named Eugene Cole, who Gil Scott Heron met when he was living in Baltimore. I think they met at like a house party or something. Brian Jackson already knew him. And he connected him to Gil Scott Heron, and they kind of started incubating about this album, the concept, what it was going to be about, what the visual language was going to be. And it was just nice in the research process of my book. I found out how much Baltimore and the DMV area in general contributed to the beginnings of Gil Scott Heron's career as a musician. But again, when I started listening to this album, it kind of exploded my mind because, like a Lupe Fiasco, Gil Scott Heron was really astute at speaking to the Black American condition. In the 70s, he talked about people who were coming back from war and not given the things that they were promised. You know, a lot of Black Americans were promised this, housing and opportunities and grants, and it just didn't happen. And I think the ramifications of that was a lot of drug abuse, homelessness, people's mental well-beings were on shaky ground, and Gil Scott Heron took his music to talk about that. And I want to play the hit song from this album, which is interesting because Gil Scott Heron wasn't a mainstream artist, but the lead single from this album, which is called The Bottle, was kind of his only mainstream song because of the rhythm of the song. But if you listen to the song, it's actually talking about 3 different stories of people struggling with alcoholism and what led them to the alcoholism. One woman, her husband was killed, and she kind of lost her way. Another guy was like a doctor in the community who looked out for young Black women. He lost his license because I guess he didn't have the proper certifications. And another story was a young guy who just kind of watched his father deteriorate from having loss of employment. So I'm gonna play a little clip of that as well. Okay, this is the last old picture of me. This is from maybe 2002, 2003, something like that. I'm probably about 12 years old. And this is on the porch of my family's house on Ramona Avenue, which is in the Bel Air Edison neighborhood in Northeast Baltimore. And this was my favorite neighborhood that I ever lived in my life. We lived here from, I was about 9 to about 14. And we had to move because my grandmother lost the house, and it was super heartbreaking for me. You know, this is like a neighborhood where it was a bunch of kids, and every day was just filled with like so much joy. You know, I would have like video game tournaments on the porch with my friends, and we would have like 8 extension cords coming out the living room and have our little TV. And, I had a lot of my first experiences in this neighborhood, you know. And long story short, we lost the house and we moved somewhere else. And, this neighborhood always stuck with me, you know. And this is before 2004. I guess we had MySpace, but it wasn't the type of social media access that we have now where you can stay in contact with people in the same way. I ended up going to high school with a couple of the people from the neighborhood, but a school relationship is not the same as like that familial small city block neighborhood where like you can throw a rock across the street and it hits the house. It was that tight of a block. And so we moved away, and I talk to some people sometimes, but fast forward to 2009, I'm in Brooklyn, New York. My freshman year of college, I went to a school called Long Island University, but their Brooklyn campus. And I was just kind of scrolling. If y'all remember, MySpace had forums or message boards or whatever it was at the time. And a guy who was my friend in high school, but we weren't super close, I saw him in the message boards mention something about being from Ramona Avenue. And I was like, wow, this is weird. Because it's such a small block. It's not like a popular block. You have to be from this neighborhood to know what it is. So I hit him up, and I was like, yo, I didn't know you was from Ramona. I lived on Ramona too, and we kind of started developing a closer relationship online. And then that summer after school, I ended up moving back home, but I pulled up on him one day, and I went to the block and reconnected with some of my old friends. Really nice time. And then when I was getting in my car to leave, he ran me down and handed me a book. So I started flipping through the book, and I started noticing these photos of people. And I was like, wow, I know like 75% of the people in this book. And it's also from the time where I lived in the neighborhood. So it was really weird because it was my memory just immortalized. So I just started looking through it, and I'm like, yo, what is this? And also, why am I not in it? You know, like I'm from here. Why am I not in this book? And he was like, my father made this book. You can hold on to it. So I held on to the book, and I flipped through it, and it's really, really beautiful black and white film photography of primarily young kids in the Bella Edison neighborhood, but even more specifically, Ramona Avenue was almost just of that block. And I was just looking through this book, and it has poetry in it as well, that his father, Mr. Ellis, wrote the poetry. And I kind of was fixated on the photos first because I was so hung up on it being my childhood friends in this book. But this is early on in my writing process where I didn't know what kind of writer I wanted to be or if I was really going to be a writer. But when I started reading the poetry was kind of social commentary about, again, like Lupe Fiasco, like Gil Scott Heron, where it was notes on the condition of the neighborhood, but also challenging these prevailing images and ideas that we have of particular black communities in urban America, where he moved to dispel a lot of those myths. He stressed that this is a community like any other community. He shot people going to church. He shot people shooting dice on the porch. He has photos, as you can see, like I said, the video game tournaments on the porch. It was a really complete picture, but it also called to question certain political pandering that happens. He talked about the Believe campaign. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but in Baltimore in the early 2000s, there was this big campaign where it felt like it was really only in black neighborhoods, where they would just give us like trash cans that said Believe and thought that was going to motivate us to do better in life. And you would just see bumper stickers that said Believe and trash cans, and it was just like, this is not helping anything. And he criticized that. And I gained such a close relationship to this book, and I think absorbing this book let me know what kind of writer and documentarian that I wanted to be. I wanted to be somebody that exhibited an extreme level of care for my community. I wanted to be somebody that could speak to the whys of why the community is the way it is. I wanted to present things tastefully and beautifully. And I wanted to send out dispatches from my corner of the world and just see who connects with it. And I think that's the common thread between all of these artists. None of them are from the same place. Gil Scott Heron is from Tennessee and moved to New York City as a kid. Lupe Fiasco is from the west side of Chicago. Mr. Ellis, who made this book, is from New Orleans, but he moved to Baltimore. I'm from Baltimore. But I think there's a through line of a certain approach to considerate storytelling. And I think without these influences, I don't become the person that I become. So I wanted to share these things with y'all today, and I'm going to leave on sharing a clip with y'all that I'm actually, for the past 3 years, I've been making a film about this book. And I also have an essay in my book that's called Revisiting Ramona. The film is called Revisiting Ramona. But it's a portrait of the artist, Mr. Ellis, who made the book. It's a portrait of the neighborhood. And it's honestly me inserting myself in a story that I wanted to be in. So I'm going to leave y'all with that. And thank you so much.
My people are outside. They are the ones with the long hours where progress can only be inside and escape only in dreams. My people live in villages surrounded by knights and sorcerers standing guard over the king's gold and extolling his virtue with magic. And oh, how these magic men play, fooling my people with tricks that you can't believe. Rabbits, doves, money, coming out of every sleeve, out of every hat, and out of every pocket. Days of work reduced in worth to hours. Rules changing constantly, angles changing to extend the life of the best trick. It is the greatest show on earth. But my people are told to play fair, and most try, but many don't. And when they cheat, they can only cheat themselves or each other. For the hands of the magic man are simply too fast, too practiced. And for my people, the future is an abstract, and future is in 10 minutes or this afternoon. The past is forgotten as soon as the present arrives. What is glory is now, immediate, then like smoke, gone. The next thing, hit, nut, is future. For them, the magic man cuts life like a diamond, showing them only one facet, that they are led to believe is the whole, and the magic man's tricks fall from sleeves all around them, cutting into stone Adam Smith's harsh reality of the workers and the crown. My people, you can hear them, outside late at night, living in the future, waiting for the next thing, pockets turned inside out.
Y'all, help me thank Lawrence.